Hey everyone, Jody Bruchon here. Crazy party person on Christmas Eve, goofing off in the computer office. So I made a post on Reddit. It kind of blew up a little bit. Maybe you can see the upvote with the number. I wonder what'll happen if I go out and I go back in. Oh look, it went up by like 9, and then went back down. Someone doesn't love me. So, on the DataHoarder subreddit, I posted this picture of this glorious mess of a server that it's really just me goofing off with busted hard drives. Like, look, I have all these drives, see? All these bad hard drives, good hard drives. I have all these drives that I salvaged out of computers, and I've always just sort of sat around thinking, hey, what if I put all these drives together and tried to get all the, little 500 to 1,000 gig laptop drives that I have sitting in a case somewhere into an actual storage server. And it was a silly idea in the back of my head for the longest time, and this morning I was just sitting around going, oh, well, I'm going to go through my usual day. Oh, it's Christmas Eve. I've got nothing in particular I have to do. And I just decided to build it. So, without further ado, here's a nice tour of the tragedy that is, well, if you don't know what a NAS is, it's network attached storage. And through reading someone else's post about this, I decided to name it Nasty. And here's why. There it is. There's the travesty. Yep, it's a friggin' mess. So we have 4 500 gigabyte hard drives and 6 1 terabyte hard drives, several of which are actually brand new. Brand new as in within the past year or two, because I pulled them from computers that were getting changed to solid states before I sold them. This seems to have migrated, actually. Oh no, that's right. It actually would have moved, wouldn't it? Well, I probably shouldn't touch anything, but here's my lovely cooling solution to keep the VRMs nice and chill. Added a Cooler Master fan, which plugs in over here. A PCI 4-port SATA adapter, and another PCI Express 4-port SATA adapter. Now, this used to have a PCI Express 2-port plus IDE adapter, which I still have, actually. Here it is. This thing, which now has X's all over it, it was flaky and the drives would drop out because it's a piece of garbage from God knows how long ago and doesn't work properly. So, 8 gigs of DDR3, that's an AMD A10 7700K. Little piece of info from the past, people. This PCI card can only handle about 133 megs a second theoretical maximum speed, because it's a PCI card. Anybody from the IDE era knows that. But there's another little quirk. So we have 4 ports. Now, if I've got 2 extra ports, why wouldn't I grab more drives and hook more drives up to this beast? Well, because part of the problem is that if you hook 2 drives up to each of these controller sections, then the drives slow each other down. So where I can pull 50 megs a second on each one of these, if I put 2 and I run them at the same time, the speed cuts in half. That's why it's important to test things before you trust them. So what I did was, when I swapped out that junky card, the new one with 4 ports, I just put 500s, 2 of them on here and 2 of them on the slower card, so that I would not be slowing anything down with that. I've got an empty PCI Express X16. God knows what I'll put in that. Maybe a 10 gigabit Ethernet card. This Bestech power supply, almost certainly out of something horrible like an E-machine. Look, complete with rust. So you know it's quality. And here's where it gets fun. This gray thing here is a 1-to-4 Molex splitter, and then plugged into that I have a 2-way SATA splitter. This is a SATA, one of the lovely molded ones everyone hates that sets your drives on fire. A 1-way SATA converter, another 1-way, and over here is another 1-way. And then there is, where's the rest of that rail go? Actually, I have no idea. Oh, it goes over here. There's an actual SATA plug on this drive. Then on the other side, there's this Molex, which goes to this Molex splitter, which goes to a SATA thing and a SATA splitter. And then there's another real SATA one. So, yeah, it looks like it should start an electrical fire. But one of the things that's different about this versus a desktop drive is that these are laptop drives. They typically use about 2.6 watts. In fact, if you look at this older Western Digital 5400, it's 5 volts, 0.55 amps, which is, you know, it's a little bit over 2.5 watts. There was a 7200 in here somewhere, a black. This is a black. This Western Digital Black uses 0.58 amps. So for the 50% higher rotation rate, it takes 0.03 more amps, which multiplied by 5 is 0.15 more watts. So none of these drives is 3 watts of juice. One desktop drive, and actually I can go pull one up. One desktop drive, if you look at the numbers, you've got 5 volts at 0.65, so that's higher, but it also pulls 12 volts at 0.5. The 12 volt rail on that is half, it's 6 watts, and then you've got a higher pull on the 5 volt. It's basically 10 watts. So for a 10 watt desktop drive versus a 2.6 watt laptop drive, you basically can run 4 of these for the power pull cost, so to speak, of one desktop. So we have roughly the equivalent of 2.5 desktop drives hooked up to this power supply. So it's not as dangerous as it looks. The problems that you have when, say, you hook 4 to 6 desktop drives to one power supply like this, and they pull too much current when you turn them on, and it's hard to get them to start up because they all just draw too much current all at once. That problem doesn't exist here. Now, if I had 24 of these, it might be a different story. But this is equivalent to 2.5 desktop drives, and a lot of them are 5400 RPM. Several of them down here are, I think, 1 terabyte per platter thin drives. So we're not talking very much power required when they first kick on. And I'm betting the power draw is even lower than what they state on the label. So that's my trashy server. Now, you're probably more interested at this point in the software side of Sears. I'm sorry, that's a reference to an old commercial about the softer side of Sears. But for you old people like me, you'll get it. For you new people, you won't. So here's what I've got going on. Here's my file system information tool. And you can see all the smart stats. There's one drive there with some error logs, but it's just that UCEC stuff. That's Ultra DMA, CRC, error counts. It doesn't show partitions because everything's part of a RAID array, but you can see the partition members down there. And what do we have going on as far as RAID arrays on this thing? Just for kicks. I set it up so if this turns out to actually work and not catch on fire, or the drives fail, I've already had several fail. In fact, all 5 of these drives turned out to be bad. But if it works out, we've got a RAID, the 0 and 1 are on the same disk. The 1 is a RAID 1 on the first partition, and that's just a FAT32, so it'll boot UEFI. But then we've got a RAID 5, which is encrypted XFS, 32K chunk to limit the problem with stripe cache. You know, the bigger the stripe is, the more parity data has to be overwritten. And MD2 here, RAID 5, also 32K chunk. MD0 is the bigger one. You see it's about 5 terabytes. I mean, it's 5 1 terabyte drives, so that makes sense. MD2 is 1.5 terabytes, but it's a RAID 5 of 500 gig drives that I paid nothing for. So this thing, this complete POS, has 6.5 terabytes of storage on a pair of RAID 5s. The 500 gig one is a little slower because of the PCI. Well, I mean, 500s are slower anyway, but because of that PCI card there that we discussed earlier. And, I mean, realistically, the 1 terabyte array is probably going to be pretty fast. I did some testing, and the drives in the array They range between 90 and 130 megs a second at the start of the disk for sequential reads. So the worst case is half that, typically. But you're talking about drives, 90 megs a second across 5 drives of data, ignoring the parity stripe. This thing could probably pull 400 megs a second sequential reads pretty easily. So there may be some value to doing this way. One of the benefits of this over going out and buying yet another 8 terabyte Western Digital Easy Store, for example, is that this is striping across smaller units. So, for example, you're looking at the MD resync here, and it's doing it at 92 megs a second. But if you had those bigger drives, they tend to actually be kind of slow because they're low rotation rate. You know, they're single drive, and they can't always push data that quickly. So if there's ever a problem with this whole mess, yeah, the RAID resync will be a problem. But as far as shuffling data in and out of it once the RAID is synced, I don't have to worry too much about it. With the with arrays that have more drives, especially if you use like RAID 6 or 10, you know, you have more redundancy, so some operations tend to be a lot faster than single drive, and blah, 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 blah. The point is you've got multiple units, so it's striping across multiple physical units, and it hits the end of those quicker, versus what you see. You know what? This isn't a friggin' lesson on RAID. I'm not gonna bother. You can figure this out for yourself. And yeah, it's slower than I'd like it to be, but we're talking laptop drives here, not desktop. Desktop drives, 3 terabyte 7200 RPM drive can push about 190 megs a second at the start. So getting half that from a 5400 RPM laptop drive, I'm not gonna complain. Anyway, so that's my disaster. We'll see if it burns the house down or not. I seriously doubt it will. And yes, if you look, there are molded SATA connectors. You can whine and moan and complain about it all you friggin' want to. I do not care. Complain all day long. But they're staying there. I'm not changing for you. The other thing too is that I don't think that they're going to arc anytime soon. Generally speaking, most of them don't fail. It's the ones that do fail that look horrific, and yeah. But they take a long time to fail even when they do. If this thing actually ends up being built into a proper computer case, I'm going to get a proper power supply, and if I have to do some kind of addition of SATA connectors or splitters or whatever, they won't be the problematic molded type. This is just for fun, people. It's just for fun. So stop harassing me, you evil techno-weenies. Actually, I hope you enjoyed this disaster. I, for one, am having a quite fun Christmas Eve, and I hope that you are as well. So, to my fellow data hoarders, the most respect. And, it figures that a car with a crappy muffler cutout and what sounded like it might be a turbo went by while I'm doing a video like this. On that note, I shall leave you. Take care. Saw you had to see my face. Bye-bye.